This will sound very strange, but Paul Simon's song, Late in the Evening, a song influenced by Latin American music, and Simon's song, Born in Puerto Rico, from his Broadway musical production, is a prophetic sign from the righteous Christian God of the Bible that is hinting at the 51st state, Puerto Rico, and the prediction that Barack Obama will become the 51st vice president on April 14th, 2024, and is predicting that singer-songwriter Paul Simon will die on May 19th or July 24th, 2024. As well, Paul Simon's famous song, Sound of Silence, and his new album named Seven Psalms, that was released last year when Simon was 81 years old, is a prophetic sign from God that points to Revelation chapter 8:1, and the description of a brief period of silence in heaven before the seven trumpets of God's wrath and judgment commence. Simon's death and his song named America will signal a brief period of calm, in other words, silence, before the seven trumpet judgments and destruction of America will begin. Simon's death will signal that it is late in the evening for America. The date that this video is posted proves that these predictions are being made ahead of time, as do these time-stamped emails and forensic notes PDF documents. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. Alright, this video was originally produced prior to March 6th, 2024. If this is your first video on this channel, the way in which God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel, is that the signs cannot be properly understood without their context and connections to other prophetic signs, and they engender trails of prophetic signs that along the way have steps. And so prior to March 6th, it was known that God was overwhelmingly pointing to March 6th regarding Paul Simon. However, it was only a step in the trail of signs leading to Paul Simon's predicted death 15 days later on March 21st. All right, March 21st also ended up being a step in the trail of signs, which will be explained in another video. And it is now believed that Paul Simon will die on May 19th or July 24th. March 6th and March 21st are both steps in the trails of signs leading to these two other dates. Paul Simon, among other reasons for the number 15, recorded 15 studio albums. The prophetic signs that occurred on March 6th that are relevant, related to Paul Simon, and this big story that God is telling through Paul Simon that includes other things, are explained. The signs that occurred on March 6th are explained in the amazing, profound, and extremely important video, the Baby Boomer Generation video. Make sure you watch that video also. But in fact, in my opinion, it should be obvious that once the prediction comes to pass, Paul Simon's death on March 21st, it should be obvious to everyone that you need to watch every minute of every video of the Paul Simon videos on this channel and all of the videos in general. And the reason why all of the Paul Simon videos need to be watched is the reason why God demonstrated these trails of signs and these steps and numerous prophetic signs. The reason why God did this is in order to reveal these stories and reveal this knowledge that God has been communicating through these themes and stories that God has been telling through these trails of prophetic signs and numerous prophetic signs that connect. They connect in order to tell these stories, which are essential. They must be watched. They must be learned to understand what God is communicating through Paul Simon. All right, so in this very, very important video, which I alluded to in part 1 of the Paul Simon video, this is arguably part 2. This is a very important video. I do recommend that you watch part 1 first, but make sure you also come back to part 2, this video, the video that is predicting that Barack Obama will become the 51st vice president, alluded to with the prophetic song of Paul Simon's Late in the Evening, as will be explained. But there's so much more. This video is on another level, and it'll really, really get into the deeper reasons for profound, astounding reasons for why it is that Paul Simon will die on March 6th. The profound reasons for God's use of Paul Simon in his big picture of prophetic end times signs. So, all right, you have come to the right place if you are interested in learning about God's signs and what he is doing and why it is that Paul Simon will die shortly and how it is that this will be a symbolic beginning to the destruction. I'll just drop something right here already. Why not? The song Sound of Silence, Paul Simon's biggest, first big hit with Art Garfunkel, the Sound of Silence song. A song that Paul Simon has admitted that he didn't really write. It just came through him. He was like a conduit, as he puts it, for this song, because it is from God. This song, Sound of Silence, this very famous song of Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel, is an allusion to the sound of silence that was heard or not heard, the period of silence in heaven after the seventh seal was opened in Revelation chapter 8 that precedes the 7 trumpets of judgment. And the song Late in the Evening, which is referring to how America's time to repent and turn back to God is late and it is about to become dark, is a song that involves trumpets. Okay? And there's lots more to be said, though. But that is why the death of Paul Simon will precede the destruction judgments of America, the 7 trumpet judgments, by a short period. This is why Paul Simon will be the first prediction to drop. There are many predictions being made on this video, but the first one that will come to pass will be Paul Simon's death on March 6th, because it will symbolize, like I am saying, Revelation chapter 8, and furthermore, Revelation chapter 8:2 and 8:1, which is why Paul Simon will die at the age of 82. His death will be a symbolic beginning of a period of silence as described in Revelation chapter 8 that precedes the destruction and judgments, which Paul Simon and the signs related to Paul Simon are also pointing to, which are explained in this video and the other videos. Make sure that when the prediction comes to pass, you watch every minute of every video that is talking about Paul Simon on this channel. Now, let's begin. First, this date, as you can see, is February 23rd. This documents that this knowledge, this information, this email was composed on February 23rd. Okay, you can also see that here, February 23rd. It was known since at least January 2023, probably earlier, that God was pointing to February 22nd. Until about a month ago, it was believed that February 22nd would be the date of the solar flare. On February 22nd, and I'm talking to friends, I'm talking to people that already know what I'm talking about, so I'm going to pause intermittently here and elaborate for you that don't know what I'm talking about necessarily. So it's predicted that there will be a solar flare on April 1st, by the way, that will knock out America's power grid and lead to food rationing and more. Okay? And anyway, Paul Simon is associated with this because, as explained in the part 1 or the Paul Simon video, his song Bridge Over Troubled Water is an allusion to the Hoover Dam. All right. And that is a symbol for the coming power outage and the sun 93 million miles away, which is why the U.S. Highway 93 runs over the Hoover Dam and on, as explained before in the other video. Okay, on February 22nd, okay, again, this date was known a year in advance to be the date of the solar flare. And then on February 22nd, there was an X-class 6.3 solar flare. It was a news story, especially because it knocked out. It was a power outage of telecommunications in the U.S. There were major disruptions in cell phone service in the U.S. because of this solar storm. And this date was known a year in advance to be the date of a solar flare that was thought to be the solar flare that would knock out the power grid. This is amazing beyond words. The date 222 hints at 22, which in God's signs is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist. The inverse of the mark of the Antichrist is described in the book of Ezekiel, and it would have been a Tav mark, and the Tav letter in the Hebrew alphabet is the last and 22nd letter in the Hebrew alphabet. And the mark of the Antichrist is described in the last and 22nd book out of 22 books in the Bible that have a total of 22 chapters, the book of Revelation. Okay, and also Caesar Augustus in Rome, the dictator, took complete control of the food supply in 22 AD. And this is why Barack Obama was born in August, as in Caesar Augustus, because Barack Obama will also take complete control of the food supply and use it and the rationing of food to enforce the taking of the mark of the Antichrist, for those that know what I'm talking about in Bible prophecy in the book of Revelation. By the way, X is symbolic of this. The Tav letter was an X in Paleo-Hebrew and is symbolic in God's signs of the mark of the Antichrist. And so this X flare, which was 6.3, which hints at 3 6s, 666, the number of the Antichrist in Bible prophecy, okay, at the peak of this telecommunications outage, 74,000 AT&T customers reported service outages on Down Detector. This was in the news story. This is this website that everyone knows about for power outages of service, a cell phone service. Okay, and so this is the number. Okay, and this date was 7 plus 4 days, which is hinted at with 74,000 customers, after Super Bowl 58, that pointed to Pope Francis and the mark of the Antichrist. Super Bowl 58 hints at 5 plus 8 equals 13, was about the number 13, because for those that I'm writing to already know, but it was the singer who is obsessed with the number 13. It was her 13th attendance of a Chiefs game. We're talking about Taylor Swift. Anyway, so the Super Bowl was all about the number 13 as explained in the Taylor Swift prophecy video, which is a must watch. The Super Bowl itself with the number hinted at 13, okay? And 222 was 13 days, or sorry, 7 plus 4 days after this. But 222 is 13 plus 13 plus 13 days before the predicted solar flare that will knock out the power grid on April 1st. Okay? February 22nd was also 13 days after the Noah flare on February 9th. Okay, so first of all, the number 13 symbolizes America. There were 13 colonies, and America is symbolically God's Israel. America is God's chosen nation. It is un-Israel. And this is alluded to in the Bible with the 13th tribe of Israel. Everyone's familiar with the 12 tribes, but Joseph was replaced by Ephraim and Manasseh. And I'm not going to go into any more detail than just this, but because this is another subject, another video. But Manasseh, as demonstrated by God in the Bible, was the younger of the two brothers, but he was given the inheritance. This is because Ephraim symbolizes the Great Britain and the descendant countries, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And America, the younger, is symbolized by Manasseh, who is symbolized by the number 13. Okay, and so that is why America is symbolized by the number 13. And speaking of Paul Simon, he has a song who in God's Signs is associated with the number 13, as explained in the other videos, has a famous song titled America. Okay? Now, this February 22nd date, which, as I'm explaining, is associated with Paul Simon, in the trail of signs leading to the death of Paul Simon, is 13 plus 13 plus 13 days before the predicted solar flare that will knock out the power grid. God frequently in his big picture of signs repeats a number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning. Okay, now further confirmation for this 13 plus 13 plus 13 days is that February 22nd was in turn also 13 days after this flare that I call the Noah flare, because on February 9th there was another X-class flare that emanated from sunspot 3575, and in Strong's Hebrew Old Testament Concordance, H3575 is the word Noah, as in Noah and the flood. That's why this is the Noah flare, and that's why it was 13 days before February 22nd and its solar flare, which connects with 13 plus 13 plus 13 days to the solar flare. Okay. Also, on February 22nd, the U.S. landed, well, it was a private company, but funded by NASA, landed on the moon for the first time in 52 years. Pope, in simple English gematria, equals 52, which is A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3. The name of the company, Intuitive Machines, that landed the lunar craft is 201 in simple English gematria. Jorge Mario Bergoglio, Pope Francis, in other words, is 201 in simple English gematria. AT&T is 201 in Hebrew gematria. March 25th, 2024 is 201 days before Judgment Day, the Day of Atonement. All right. When Lord Jesus Christ will return on October 12th, 2024. And the purpose of the prediction being made in this video is to prove this. Believe me, I know far better than you why the purpose of this prediction that is being made, that is from God, and it is to prove these things, including the day of the second coming. No one knows the hour. The most quoted verse in the Bible is and those who quote it have a misunderstanding. It's a mistranslation, first of all, and it's a misinterpretation of its context, etc. It is not true what they are claiming, that the day of the Lord's return is not knowable. It is knowable. It is known with 100% certainty. And the purpose of this prediction being made in this video is to prove this. Furthermore, Amos 3:8 says that God does nothing without informing his servants first. And his servants would be those that are watching the signs. And most even supposed watchers aren't really watching the signs. They look for a couple of signs in the night sky, and then try to extrapolate some supposed hidden clue from the Bible, and that's the extent of their watching. But the signs in the night sky are a tiny fraction of the total of God's science. And you will start to appreciate this through watching the videos on this channel. Anyway, why March 25th? Well, this is the date it is predicted that James Earl Jones will die, and the historic barge that is stuck on the rocks of the Niagara River will crash over Niagara Falls. Okay, it is Noah's flood symbolism, and in the account of Noah's flood, God gave Noah a 7 days warning before the flood judgment, and James Earl Jones is being used, the voice of the Lion King in the movie The Lion King, as a metaphor for the coming lion's roar on the surface of the sun, the solar flare, 7 days after March 25th on April 1st. All right, there was also this, I'm not going to say the word, okay? It's a word that begins with the letter E and ends with vent, and its number is 201, all right? That was the well-known, for those that are interested in being informed about what is really going on, that was the well-known convention of the censor something, global something-ists, right? That simulated the response to a PAN and then a EMIC, a panda, you know what, a panda and then an EMIC, okay? Okay, so anyway, let's move on. There's lots more to cover here. So 52 is 2 times 26, which hints at H226, which is the word in Strong's Hebrew Concordance that means prophetic sign. The landing on the moon was the first time in 52 years, that was the first one in 52 years, was a prophetic sign in the night sky, a sign in the second heaven. It occurred in conjunction with the solar flare on the sun, which is also in the night sky, also in space. The moon symbolizes Christ because the sun symbolizes God the Father, and the sun's light is too bright for us to gaze at, but we can gaze at the sun's light reflected off of the moon. This is why watching for the timing of the moon in the Bible is important, and why watching for the Lord's signs is symbolic, or watching the timing of the moon is symbolic of watching for the Lord's return and his prophetic signs, okay? And it is a giant rock. And in the Bible, rock is symbolism for Jesus. Okay, and America's last landing on the moon in 1972 symbolizes America's departure from Christ. The last American to step off of the moon is symbolic of America's departure from Christ in God's signs. That was Apollo 17. That's why the 2 space shuttle disasters occurred exactly 17 years apart, and why the 2 planes struck the 2 towers and exploded 17 minutes apart. It all points back to Apollo 17 because it symbolizes America's departure from Christ. The 74,000 AT&T customers that lost service hints at the date 7/4, July 4th, the date that symbolizes America. In other words, this power outage for 74,000 customers that was caused by the solar flare was a warning for America because it hints at the date 7/4, the date that symbolizes America. If the Lord wished to communicate 7 and 11 in order to point to the verse in which the flood judgment began in the Bible, Genesis 7:11, and wished to communicate 7 and 11 through only 2 numbers, 7 and 4 would be one way to do this. 7 and 2 would be another way. 2 would hint at 2 ones. This would be the reason why Amelia Earhart's plane crashed on the date 7/2, because it crashed into the ocean, and 7/11, the flood judgment, right? Water. Okay, her plane crashed on the date 7/2. This is why, and was discovered recently on the 27th of the month of January, 27 being a 7 and 2, which was 7 times 2 days before Swift's plane over the Pacific, because Amelia Earhart's plane crashed into the Pacific, which is 7 times 2 days before Harris's predicted crash. Okay, now this was written before February 24th, and it was realized before February 24th that it would only be a step in the trail. In fact, maybe it was early in the morning on the 24th, but regardless, the day didn't come and go without it being realized. But anyway, her predicted crash is now predicted to be March 19th, 2024. And the other videos will explain how February 24th is a step in the trail. And again, anyway, the purpose here is that February 24th was 7 times 2 days after Swift's plane, which was 7 times 2 days after the discovery of Amelia Earhart's plane that crashed on the date 7/2. Okay, I think you got that. Now, in the account of the flood, it was a 7 days warning followed by 40 days of increasing floodwaters. 7 and 4 hint at this. 7 gives us 7, and 7 plus 4 gives us 11. Okay? Therefore, 7 and 4 give us, hint at, 711. This is why 74,000 customers lost service due to the solar flare. By the way, I just want to say that I'm just warming up. This is really just an introduction. This was my first thoughts, and I'm just analyzing directly in the immediate present the signs that occurred on February 22nd. Stay tuned. It's going to get a lot more interesting. Don't skip ahead though. But just to let you know that I'm just getting started here. I'm just going through what happened on February 22nd, and then we will get into the deeper stuff. Okay? All right. It was predicted that on February 22nd, Paul Simon would die. One reason the Lord pointed to February 22nd with Paul Simon signs is the song, Like a Bridge Over Troubled Water. As explained in the video, I'm referring to part 1 of this video, this song and Paul Simon connect to the Hoover Dam, which was built to produce electric power, and over which runs U.S. Highway 93, which hints at the sun that is 93 million miles away from Earth. Like a Bridge Over Troubled Water, Simon and Garfunkel's 5th album won 5 awards at the 13th Grammys. February 22nd was 50 days after the Simon sign on 1-3, which hints at 13. That was about the number 13. The signs on that date were about the number 13 as well, as I explained in the other videos. February 22nd was 13 days after the Noah flare, and is 13 plus 13 plus 13 days before the solar flare and power outage. I'm just basically summarizing again how Paul Simon is being used to point to a coming solar flare and a power outage. And one way that is demonstrated in God's signs is the connection between Paul Simon and the song Bridge Over Troubled Water and the Hoover Dam. And that's explained in part 1 of this video. For one thing, just for example, his birth connects to the day that the Hoover Dam ceremoniously opened, and it's and on, okay? Now, February 22nd is 13 days before Obama is predicted to be appointed the vice president. Okay, so this email was written before it was realized that this email was composed before it was realized that Paul Simon would die on March 6th, and that Paul Simon's death in itself will be a step in the trail of signs that is leading to the date that Barack Obama will become the 51st vice president. This is explained further on in this email thread. Wait till you hear the explanation. It is so amazing. Okay? But what I am basically getting at right here is that for a long time, this date, March 6th, was known to be pointed to by God, and it was known that it is being pointed to as a date relevant to Barack Obama and him becoming the 51st vice president. All right, I made actually over a video that's over an hour long, which is so amazing, regarding the signs that God was demonstrating that point to March 6th as the date that Barack Obama would become the 51st vice president. But now it is clear that it will be a step in the trail of signs leading to April 14th, the date it is predicted that Barack Obama will become the 51st vice president. All right. Again, by the way, the date 3/6 hints at 3 6s, 666, the number of the Antichrist, Barack Obama. I should correct that. It's not actually completely precise. The number 66 in Bible prophecy is in fact referring to Pope Francis, but in God's signs, it is symbolic of both of the Antichrists. It's interchangeable. God can use the number 666 in relation to Barack Obama, even though he is the second of the two Antichrists described in Revelation chapter 13, speaking of the number 13 again. Because in the Bible, the number 13 symbolizes the Antichrists, okay? So the Antichrists are described in Revelation chapter 13. 3/6, March 6th, will be 63 days after the Simon Mansion sign on January 3rd that was about the number 13, okay? And that's explained in the other video, part 1, the Paul Simon video, okay? And 63 days, which by the way hints at 3 6s, and also the date 3/6, by the way. 63 days is also 9 weeks, right? 7 times 9. And 9 times 13 equals 117, which is symbolic of the rapture. Paul Simon in God's signs is symbolic of the rapture. As explained in the other video, this is the reason for Graceland, Bridge Over Troubled Water, and Homeward Bound. Okay, if you don't know what the rapture is, in Christianity, it is this event when God's faithful will be rescued from the severe persecution from the Antichrist. They will not die, they will disappear, go to heaven with the Lord, and then return with him at his second coming in their resurrected bodies. All right, now the number 117 symbolizes this, okay, in God's signs. This is because just, I can only touch on these superficially, right? These many things. We can't make this video, 8 hours long, right? So the number 117, because Jesus was resurrected on the 17th day of the first month. The waters of the Red Sea were divided after the Israelites escaped Egypt on the 17th day of the first month, 117. The rapture and the resurrection will be a separation, a division, hence the divided waters of the Red Sea. A separation of God's faithful from the world, right? And this is what's alluded to, okay? That's a long story in a nutshell. You'll have to take my word for it, but the number 117 is very big in God's signs, and that's what it hints at. And it hints at the rapture because of this symbolism. And Paul Simon hints at the rapture, okay, as explained in the other video, which I said you need to watch first before this video. You might want to reconsider if you haven't, and you are watching this first, pausing this video, watch the other one, and then come back. March 6th will be exactly 3,033 weeks after the release of Homeward Bound from Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel's third album. That's amazing. Okay, now, because Paul Simon symbolizes the rapture, Jesus was resurrected at the age of 33. Okay, and it was their second hit single, and the song is 2 minutes and 30 minutes. Okay, 3/6 is in turn 9 times 9 days before the rapture. Okay, now I just touched on something that you wouldn't necessarily understand, but those who I'm writing to do. God pairs 9 and 23 together in his signs to confirm the signs and connections. I'll just leave it at that, okay? Because the Antichrist became the president in 2009 and wore jersey 23 when he played basketball in high school. Enough said. All right. Now, March 6th is in turn 9 times 9 days before the rapture. Okay? And as I said, March 6th is 13 days after February 22nd. This gives us a pairing of 9 and 13, which God also pairs together to confirm his signs and connections. One reason being is, like I said, 9 times 13 equals 117. Another reason is that the number 9 from the Bible symbolizes God's judgment, and the number 13 symbolizes the Antichrist, and so this equation hints at judgment through the Antichrist. Okay, now the thing is, God's faithful will be rescued from the Antichrist 9 times 9 days after Paul Simon is predicted to die, which is 13 days after the solar flare that knocked out the cell phone communication. Okay, now, Simon is symbolism for the rapture. This 9 times 9 days from 3/6 is also preceded by 13 days, okay? Another pairing of 9 and 13, like I just said. February 22nd is also 13 plus 13 plus 13 days before the solar flare. Therefore, it seems that Paul Simon will die on 3/6. Okay, I guess well, as I'm writing this, it's when I first came to realize that he will die on March 6th. The same day that Obama will be appointed the vice president. Well, now we know that's not the case, okay? He will be appointed the vice president 13 plus 13 plus 13 days after Paul Simon will die, okay? And again, Paul Simon is associated with the number 13, as I explained. This will communicate rapture from the Antichrist. Okay? So did you get that? The day of the rapture, May 26th, is 9 times 9 days after Paul Simon will die, and it's paired with the number 13, and 9 times 13 hints at the rapture. That's amazing. And furthermore, we have the other 13s in the connections as well. Not only that, but also February 22nd was 13 days after the Noah flare. And Noah and the rescue of his family in the ark is symbolic of the rapture. Okay. 74,000 customers also hints at just over 70,000, which gives us a number 7. Paul Simon's prophetic recent album is named 7 Psalms. Okay, and I went into what this album is about in part 1. Like I said, turn off this video, go watch part 1 and come back. Okay, this is very, very important, all right? And you need to watch part 1 to understand this, the significance of his new album, 7 Psalms. Okay? And so this hints at the 7 churches and the 7s of judgments in the book of Revelation. It's starting to dawn on me here the significance of everything and how Paul Simon is pointing to the 7 judgments in Revelation chapter 8, like I mentioned earlier, that follow the sound of silence in heaven. Okay? All right. The loss of service for, and by the way, the sound of silence is Revelation 8:1, 9 times 9 days is 81. 7 Psalms was released when Paul Simon was 81. I'm jumping ahead, actually, because this is later on in the thread as I come to... Basically, I'm writing this as I learn myself, right? I'm just, recording it as the revelations come to me, right? The insights. But this is so huge. Okay? The 7 Psalms album, hinting at the 7 judgments in the book of Revelation, and also the 7 churches, because as I explained in part 1, the signs involving Paul Simon are signs for the church. Okay? Paul Simon was 9 times 9 years old when he released his 7 Psalms album. H82, the 82nd word in Strong's Hebrew Concordance, is the word to fly. Simon equals rapture, flight. Okay, so again, Simon symbolizes the rapture, but the rapture is a flight. The Lord's faithful will be caught up into the air. Flight symbolizes the rapture. Okay, that's why Paul Simon will die at the age of 82. The album was released at the age of 81 because of Revelation 8:1 and the sound of silence. Revelation 8:2 is the 7 trumpets, the beginning of the description of the 7 trumpets, when it says that 7 trumpets were given to the angels, 7 angels. Okay? And this is amazing, as you can see. Okay. 144 is the number, is symbolic of those who will be raptured. His 82nd birthday is 144 days in between count before his predicted death on March 6th, which is 9 times 9 days before the rapture. In the Bible, 50 years is symbolic of return of Lord Jesus Christ and the rapture of the church. The prophetic Like a Bridge Over Troubled Water documentary, as explained in part 1 of this video, was released on the 50th anniversary of the song, Like a Bridge Over Troubled Water. 1,440, which hints at 144, days before the Simon Mansion roof fire sign on January 3rd, as explained in part 1, which is 144 days before the rapture. And again, the number 144 symbolizes those who will be raptured from the book of Revelation, from the 7th seal, in fact. The 144,000 is the 7th seal in Revelation chapter 7. If it's not, so you have to understand that the book of Revelation isn't, it's an allegory, right? It's all symbolism, and so not everything is exactly in chronological order. All right? Wouldn't be possible for God to do it that way. Anyway, let's move on. Part of the Paul Simon Mansion sale sign is that he has relocated to New Canaan, Connecticut. From New Canaan, Connecticut to Texas. New Canaan, by the way, is another word title for the promised land, which is a metaphor for heaven, which is where those who will be raptured will go, right? Into their mansions, by the way, which Jesus said would be prepared for them and waiting for them. As explained in part 1, that's part of this Paul Simon Mansion sale sign, all right, which is explained in part 1. His studio, in which he produced 7 Psalms, is on his ranch near San Antonio, okay? So he relocated to San Antonio, or just outside of it, and that's where he produced his new album, 7 Psalms. San Antonio is the location of the Battle of the Alamo, which is known for the 13-day siege before the walls of security were breached. Simon's death on 3/6 will be 13 days after February 22nd, which was 50 days after the mansion fire on the date 1/3 that was all about the prophetic signs that were about the number 13. The date 1/3 hints at 13, and the signs on that date, as explained in part 1, were about the number 13. And Like a Bridge Over Troubled Water was their 5th album that won 5 Grammys at the 13th Grammy Awards. 3/6, again 13 days after the flare on February 22nd, will be exactly 188 years after the end of the 13-day siege. All right, so I wrote this paragraph here when it was all first coming to me. If you've watched part 1, you really got a good, lesson on how the number 13 is associated with Paul Simon and the signs on January 3rd that were about the number 13, etc. Okay? This is because one reason is the 13-day siege at the Battle of the Alamo, and the end of it, when the walls of security of the Alamo were breached, is exactly 188 years before it is predicted that Paul Simon will die near the Battle of the Alamo, because the Battle of the Alamo site is in downtown San Antonio. Okay? Now, that is so amazing, because this sign that is the death of Paul Simon will, like I'm saying, precede symbolically a period of silence in heaven that will be followed by the trumpet judgments and destruction of America, when its walls of security will collapse in God's judgment. The reason for 188 years, this exact 188 years, it was March 6th, 1836, when the walls were breached at the Battle of the Alamo, because God frequently uses this number 188 in his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, because H188, the 188th word in Strong's Hebrew Old Testament Concordance, is the word woe ! Which is used in the context of extreme judgment from God. Woe! Paul Simon will die 188 years. He will die near San Antonio. 188 years after the Battle of the Alamo and the breaching of the walls of security, when they were all killed inside the fort. That is a huge woe. All right. San Antonio was part of the Seinfeld basketball prophecy, which is explained in other videos, but it's a major sign from God. The iconic heart attack episode that aired in 1991 that is about Seinfeld and George and Kramer visiting a witch doctor who gives Seinfeld an obscure prophecy regarding a basketball score. Okay, it's a little bit wonky, right? But that's Seinfeld for you. That's the show, right? Anyway, the prophecy was San Antonio 109, Cleveland 117. We've already touched a little bit on the significance of 117. All right. And by the way, in No, I'm not going to go there. Well, there was the prophetic 117th season of the Cleveland Indians, but that's another story. Okay, and it's a really interesting one, but it's covered in another video somewhere. And anyway, by the way, when this prediction comes to pass, you should know that you need to watch every minute of every video on this channel. Okay, but the score of 109 to 117 also hints at the basketball president, who was president from 09 to 17. Okay, now the walls of security of Jerusalem were breached by the Babylonians on the 9th of Tammuz and by the Romans on the 17th of Tammuz, which is a month in the Hebrew calendar. So the number 9 and 17, in other words, are associated with breaching of walls of security. And so is San Antonio, which is the reason for this basketball prophecy involving San Antonio that involves the number 9 and 17. Okay? Which is why Obama will become the vice president on the day that Simon will die. No, this is written before it was realized that it's a step. Okay, I explained that already. Now, orange basketball shots are symbolic of the coming solar flare shot from the sun. In God's signs he is using, it's amazing. It took a while, but I mean, this is one reason why the Antichrist is the basketball president, for that matter. Because after the coming power outage, the food will be rationed by this man who will ration the food to only those who have taken the mark of the Antichrist. You will not be able to buy and sell food unless you have taken the thing, which is the mark of the Antichrist. And that's why he's the basketball president, because orange basketball shots are symbolic of the coming solar flare shot from the sun. Now, one other thing too, speaking of San Antonio 109, Obama first arrived in Washington, D.C. in the 109th Congress as the senator from Illinois. He also lived on 109th Street when he attended Columbia University. And in God's signs, Columbia symbolizes America. And furthermore, Washington is the District of Columbia. So, all right. The solar flare on February 22nd was 380 days after February 7th, 2023, the 38th day of the year, when LeBron James was 38 years old and scored 38 points in the game where he became the leading scorer in the NBA history when he reached 38,388 career points, breaking Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's record set on April 5th, 1984, exactly 38 years and 308 days prior. This LeBron James game was played against the Oklahoma City Thunder, the team LeBron had beaten in the finals to win the NBA championship, exactly 3,883 days prior. By the way, this 380 days connection from this game involving the number 38 was known to February 22nd, the day of the predicted solar flare, which ended up being a solar flare, an orange basketball shot from the sun. It was known since early 2023. This 380 days connection was part of the confirmation that led to it being known that February 22nd would be about a solar flare. And then it was, when the solar flare knocked out the cell phone coverage for 74,000 customers. That is amazing. And proof that orange basketball shots are symbolic of the coming solar flare shot from the sun. It's so amazing. I knew this a year in advance, this 380 days connection. By the way, LeBron James is one of the GOATs of basketball, greatest of all time, which God is using to symbolize the GOAT, Antichrist, who also, like LeBron James, wore jersey 23 when he played basketball in high school. Because 2 divided by 3 equals 0.666, the number of the Antichrist. That's just one reason of many reasons. Okay, let's move on. The Battle of the Alamo in 1836 and the year 2024 are both leap years, making 36 the date, 666, which hints at 666, 3 sixes, making it this year the 66th day of the year. 1836 hints at 18, which equals 6 plus 6 plus 6, and 36, which hints at 3 sixes. By the way, 36 doesn't only hint at 3 sixes because it hints at 3 sixes. It is also 6 times 6, and 2 times 18, which is 6 plus 6 plus 6. And also, the 36th triangular number, which in a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 36th row is 666. And 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 all the way up to 36 equals 666. Okay? Hence why Paul Simon will be a sign that points to the 51st Vice President Barack Obama, as I will explain in a minute. 36 will be 68,666 days from 36 in 1836, the end of the 13-day siege of the Alamo when the walls of security were breached. The Mexican army soldiers scaled the walls exactly 38 months before 36 was the day that people scaled the wall in front of the Capitol building on the 6th day of the first month. You know what I'm talking about, that date. Obama will be appointed, no he won't, not on this date, but anyway, just as Gerald Ford was appointed vice president in the Capitol building. Okay, who was the only president to never have been elected vice president or president? The 38th president. This is another reason why God uses 38. And why LeBron James and the signs involving 38, the goat of basketball, goat Antichrist, is because like President Ford, the only president to serve, who was never elected vice president or president, he was appointed, both vice president and president. Barack Obama will also be appointed in the Capitol building, which is the reason for the 38 months connection to the Capitol building, to the state that is a step on the trail to Obama being appointed in the Capitol building. Okay, this is how, by the way, he will overcome the 22nd Amendment, which restricts someone from being elected more than twice. He will overcome this by not being elected, but instead appointed. Somehow, the Supreme Court will go for that. I don't know how that happens, because, well, you know what? I do know how that happens. The Supreme Court it's not really a conservative majority. John Roberts isn't a conservative, for one thing. But anyway, which brings us back to, and also he's compromised. John Roberts is clearly compromised. He's being blackmailed. It's not really speculation. I know that. I don't have a proof for you, but I know that. He was listed on Jeffrey Epstein's plane. He's on the list. He's associated with Jeffrey Epstein, and he was in the business of blackmailing people and politicians for power. That was his role in the bigger scheme of things. He was just a worker in that. He was just a pawn as well. But anyway, so let's move on. Which brings us back to the Seinfeld prophecy. The team San Antonio played was Cleveland. President Cleveland was the only president to serve non-consecutive terms. Obama will serve non-consecutive terms and will be unelected. Okay. Seven plus 4 days before 74,000 customers lost service was the Swift Super Bowl. The internet is talking about how her outfit cost almost the equivalent of the average household income in America, which is $74,000, making this confirmation that 74 and the date 74 are symbolic of America. And it's confirmation of the connection from her outfit of $74,000 almost of 7 plus 4 days to the 74,000 customers. But also the fact that it's the average income or household income in America makes it also confirmation that 74 hints at America. And by the way, I was born in 74. That's a personal sign. That's not really I'm just saying. Regarding the outage of cell phone service due to a solar flare, one of the confirmations for the solar flare on April 1st is that April 1st is 60 plus 60 plus 60 days after the FEMA alert test for all cell phones on October 4th, 2023. Okay, so let me just repeat that. So again, on February 22nd, which is what this email thread is about, kinda, it's where we began anyway. And anyway, that was all about the solar flare that knocked out the cell phone coverage. Well, anyway, what confirms that the solar flare will be on April 1st, the solar flare, is that it was 60 plus 60 plus 60 days, which obviously hints at 666, the number of the Antichrist, after the national FEMA, which is Antichrist, because FEMA will be used in this upcoming emergency by the president. This was the alert test for cell phones on October 4th, 2023. The solar flare on February 22nd came from sunspot 3590. H3590 equals a spark, which hints at the coming fire from the sun 13 plus 13 plus 13 days after February 22nd, which is 39 days. This is why the Dow crossed the 39,000 level for the first time on February 22nd. The Dow also closed above 39,000 for the first time on February 22nd. This all-time high on February 22nd is a high place for the Dow, and the fire in the sky 39 days later will come from the sun, which is a high place. By the way, also, 39 hints at 93, and the sun is 93 million miles away from Earth. So, yeah, that's why this is amazing here. This solar flare, it's actually 39 days, but it hints at 93 as well. This solar flare on February 22nd is, in fact, hinting at the solar flare from the sun through the 39 days also. And the 39,000 level in the Dow. That's amazing. Because again, the 39,000 level in the Dow will also be a hint at 93. Paul Simon lives in Wimberley, Texas, near San Antonio. The star basketball player is Victor Wembanyama. Simon equals rapture equals victory for God's saints equals Victor Wembanyama. Wembanyama hints at Obama, who is the basketball president, which is why Wembanyama is a basketball star for San Antonio. All right. God has used many of these words and names that sound like Obama to hint at Obama. It's pretty cool, pretty interesting. Satan equals 55 in simple English gematria. The most evil king during the most wicked period in Israel was King Manasseh, who ruled for 55 years. Wembenyama equals Manasseh. It's also a hint at Manasseh, the evil king. This isn't the tribe of Manasseh that I mentioned earlier. This is a different Manasseh, the king Manasseh. On February 23rd, which hints at 223, which is the 48th prime number, which hints at the 48th president, Wembenyama, which hints at Obama, who will be the 48th president, had what is called a 5x5 game, which is at least 5 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, 5 steals, and 5 blocks in a game. This was in a game against the Los Angeles, which hints at Fallen Angels, Lakers, which hints at Lake of Fire, on the date 2/23, which hints at the 48th basketball president. It was the first time a player had done this since 2019, the year that the Seinfeld San Antonio basketball prophecy was fulfilled. Victor Wembanyama became the 15th player in history to post these stats and was the youngest player, which is a record, and God uses records for his signs, to do so, and in the least amount of time, in his career. So only 15 players have done this 5x5 game, and he did it. I think he's a rookie, which is a record because no other player had done it as quickly in his career. He also became the second player after Michael Jordan, which is a hint at Obama because Michael Jordan, player number 23 for Chicago, hints at Obama, who wore jersey 23 and is from Chicago. The GOAT, he's also a GOAT, Obama GOAT Antichrist. He became the second player after Michael Jordan to have at least 5 blocks and 5 steals in consecutive games, which is a hint at 55, and Manasseh, which hints at Wembenyama. Wembenyama was the 15th player to achieve this, and this was done 1 month and 5 days, which hints at 15, before it is predicted that Simon will die in Wimberley near San Antonio. So Paul Simon's estate is in Wimberley, and that's why near San Antonio, and that's why Wembenyama plays for San Antonio. The date Simon is predicted to die is the date it is predicted that the 25th Amendment will be used to make Obama, Wembenyama, the basketball president. Now again, we now know that it will be 13 plus 13 plus 13 days after Paul Simon will die. All right? Well, anyway, a 5x5 game also hints at 5x5 equals 25, the 25th Amendment, which will be used to make the basketball president the vice president. On the day of Wembenyama's 5x5 game, he was 20 years old and 50 days old, which hints at 25. Victor Wembenyama was born on January 4th, 2004, exactly 509 months after Barack Obama was born. 509 is the 97th prime number. 97 is the 25th prime number, and this hints at the 25th Amendment. The talk about young Wembenyama is that there is no quote-unquote ceiling. The Lakers' LeBron James, by the way, when he did this 5x5 games, he was playing LeBron James, the GOAT, number 23, which hints at Obama. And after the game, LeBron James commented that there was no ceiling for this young player. That's amazing that LeBron James is part of this sign. Okay? And the player is 7'4", which inside America. Oh, and the reason is because I don't know if I say this in a second. No, I don't. Okay, so the point of this is this is unusual because players that are this tall usually don't play very well. They're not very fast. That's why, you don't have 7 feet 4" players. You have tall players, but not that tall. But Wembanyama is a great player, and he's that tall, which gives him a huge advantage. Okay. But the point is that highlights this number, which hints at America. Orange basketball shots are symbolic of the coming shot from the sun. Paul Simon points to the sun. Again, the Hoover Dam, the roof fire in the mansion, as explained in part 1 of the video. On the same day as the no ceiling comment by LeBron James, news broke of another high-altitude balloon that is carrying a 2-foot cube and is 50 feet tall, which hints at 25. The spy balloon that entered the U.S. on January 31st, 2023, the Chinese spy balloon, is alien deception symbolism, which is explained in other videos, and a nickname for Wembanyama is the extraterrestrial, due to his rare ability to play for someone his height. The last time a player posted a 5x5 game was on January 1st, 2019, which hints at 9/11. On this day was the Rose Bowl Parade locomotive, locomotive 119, fire sign. Okay, I'll explain. The second last float of the parade caught fire, and they attempted to reverse the float off the road, making the locomotive 119 a 9/11 sign, because the 119 was going in reverse, because the 119 is on the side of the locomotive, which is the historic 119 locomotive, as I'll explain. Well, it was the Transcontinental Railroad when the two floats came together. The Jupiter locomotive met the locomotive 119 in Utah and united the Transcontinental Railroad, and the Rose Bowl Parade was the first day of the year in which it was the 150th anniversary. Okay, the last float behind this float was the Call 811 float. Okay, that's the public service Call 811. Call 811 is for calling regarding before digging, so that you don't accidentally cause a power outage. All right. So you see where I'm going here so far. Okay. So we've got this fire float in the Rose Bowl Parade on the first day of 2019, which gives us a 9/11 sign. The float goes in reverse, making it a 9/11 sign. And it's a fire sign. And the last float in the parade, which is behind this float, which is stuck behind it, stuck behind it while it's trying to reverse, making the 9/11 sign, is the 811 float. Okay? And that in itself is a hint at 9/11, or vice versa. In other words, God is pointing to the 811 float because it's about power outages. That's what Call 811 is about. You have to call before you dig in your backyard so that you don't accidentally hit a power line and knock out the power. On this same January 1st, 19th date was the stunning sign on the sun of a baby in the womb. I'll show a picture of this in a second. Okay? Orange basketball shots are symbolic of a shot from the sun. The coming shot of fire from the sun will cause a power outage, which is the reason for the fire float, because fire from the sun, right? And the call 811 float. The player's name that did this, because again, the reason why we're talking about this date in the first place is because this was the last time that a player did a 5x5 game before the recent one, Wembanyama. And the reason it was a news story is because it had been so long since the last time this was done. And that's because God was pointing to this last time that this was done. And why did he point to this last time that the 5x5 game was done? Is because orange basketball shots symbolize the solar flare from the sun that's coming. And that's why on this day, we had this fire sign and the power outage sign in the float. And it was the same day as this stunning sign on the sun, which I'll explain. So you got the connections there? That's amazing. The player's name is Jusuf Nurkic, which equals 153 in simple English gematria. And 153 is symbolic of the end of the age of fishing for men, because in Jesus' last miracle, 153 fish were caught in the net. And this hints at the end of the Rose Bowl parade. In other words, the end of the Rose Bowl parade hints at the end times and the end of the age of fishing for men. On the day, and the end of the Rose Bowl parade sign was the day of the basketball player whose name equals 153. The float that caught fire commemorated the 150th anniversary of the Transcontinental Railroad. By the way, 150th hints at Wembanyama, the 15th player to do a 5x5 game. When Locomotive Jupiter met Locomotive 119, as I explained. This coming together of the locomotives and the name of one of them being Jupiter hinted at Jupiter-Venus conjunctions when Jupiter and Venus come together in the night sky. And they have been, in God's signs, symbolic of the rapture, which is also symbolized by the number 153 and the 153 fish. This Jupiter-Venus sign in the parade, okay, that's essentially what it is. The Jupiter 119 locomotive is essentially a Venus-Jupiter conjunction sign, because that's what the locomotives did. They came together like the planets do for these rapture signs in the night sky. Okay, so the Venus-Jupiter sign in the parade was the same day as the sign on the sun in the sky. And this was the day of the basketball sign, which hints at the coming shot of fire from the sun and power outage, which is again the reason for the railroad float fire and call 811. Jusuf Nurkic's number is 27, which hints at 9 plus 9 plus 9, the most important number in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, as from the Bible, the number 9 symbolizes God's judgment. But it is judgment for what? Specifically in this sign, it is judgment for the murder of babies in the womb, because that was the sign on the sun. It was this image of it resembled a, the ultrasound image of a fetus in a womb. I'll show you the image now. All right. I used to have actually a video of this. As you can see, this is an image, but there's a video that goes with this. And anyway, as you can see, it's even in the correct position, because babies in the womb are sitting in this angle, just like the baby. It's amazing. Okay, this fetal position of the baby is even on the correct angle. Part of the 5x5 Wembanyama story, I should say Wembanyama, as in Obama, is about how there hadn't been a 5x5 game since 2019. Thus the Lord is pointing to this 2019 game, as I made the point earlier. Correction, the 15th player, Wembanyama, sign is 1 week and 5 days to the predicted death of Simon in Wimberley, not 1 month and 5 days. All right. Okay. Here we get, now it's going to get really interesting. On the cover of Simon's new album, Seven Psalms, is an owl. On February 23rd, the day of the Wembanyama Wimberley, Wembanyama again hints at Wimberley and Simon, who will die in Wimberley near San Antonio, where Wembanyama plays. Okay, so on February 23rd, the day of the Wembanyama sign, his 5x5 game, it was announced that the famous Central Park owl had died. The release of Seven Psalms was exactly 500 months after 500,000 people attended Simon and Garfunkel's famous and prophetic reunion concert in Central Park, which is explained more in part 1 of this video. Paul Simon's name in Hebrew gematria equals 500. And also, the 500th word in Strong's Greek Concordance is the word Antichrist. But anyway, the Seven Psalms album connects to the Central Park concert, and on the cover of the album is an owl, and there was the prophetic death of this owl in Central Park that I'm getting at. The owl's name is Flacco. Flacco, okay, so the story of the owl, if I don't get into it here, the owl was released. Someone climbed the fence at night and let the owl out. And for many months, this owl became famous as it was flying around Central Park, and bird watchers came to look at him, and he often hung out in the same tree. So he was famous. The media was talking about him, etc. New York fell in love with this owl, okay? And he died after flying into a building and was pronounced dead on this date, February 23rd. Okay? So, now, back to what we were saying. The owl's name is Flacco. Flacco equals 222 in English gematria. The solar flare Paul Simon sign was on 222. Probably the owl died the day or night before the announcement on February 23rd. So maybe the owl flew into the building at night on February 22nd, 222, which is what the name Flacco hints at. The owl escaped in Central Park, the owl escaped the Central Park Zoo on February 2nd, 2023, which was 386 days before February 23rd, 2024. Okay, and again, the date 223 hints at 223, the 48th prime number, which hints at the 48th president. That's relevant because of the owl here, as I will explain. So this 386 days between the time that he got free to the day he died hints at this. The 386th word in Strong's Greek Concordance, which is the word that means resurrection, a raising up, which hints at the rapture, because the rapture will be on the day of the resurrection. Furthermore, those who will be raptured will be transformed into their resurrection bodies, and they will escape this world and the Antichrist. Okay, and all of this rapture symbolism is contained in the prophetic significance of Paul Simon, as I have been explaining in this video and also part 1. And so that's why this is amazing here. Now again, in other words, the time in which the owl was flying around Central Park is rapture symbolism, because it was 386 days, and this hints at the resurrection and the raising up and the rapture. Okay, the raising up is someone from the grave, right? That's what the raising up means. The announcement of the owl's death on February 23rd was 333% of a year, which is also 3 years, 3 months, and 30 days, after the Rice Owl's quadruple doink. This was a major prophetic sign explained in other videos. All right, very cool sign here. But the football kicked by the kicker for the Rice University Owls ended up hitting the goalpost 4 times before bouncing back into the end zone and not going through. It was a quadruple doink, which hints at the 44th president, because the double doink signs that have been occurring have been hinting at the double doink presidency of Barack Obama. But this was a quadruple doink. But the reason for this, one reason, well, another reason that I wasn't about to explain, but I just might mention it anyway. The stadium is where John F. Kennedy delivered his famous speech about going to the moon. And Kennedy died while in office, and Kamala Harris will die while in office, which will lead to Barack Obama replacing her and becoming the president. Well, anyway, Obama was known to be the night owl president, in contrast with his predecessor, George Bush, who was known to be the early bird president. So Obama is the night owl president, which is the reason for the owl signs here. Also, the first instance of the word owl is in Leviticus 11:17, and the word Bama is H1117, which means high place. Anyway, and so also the Antichrist is described in Zechariah 11:17. Anyway, we're getting off track. But the point is that Obama is associated with this owl symbolism. Okay. February 23rd, the day the owl died, is 3 months and 3 days before the rapture. 3 exclamation marks. That is so amazing because, again, February 23rd was 333% of a year, which happens to also be 3 years, 3 months, and 30 days after the Rice Owl's quadruple sign. That connects to the day the owl died, which in turn connects with 3 months and 3 days to the rapture. And the rapture is about flight, as I explained. And the owl is a bird that flies. And he flew into the building. So, and he flew to his freedom. But more importantly, he flew to his freedom when he escaped the zoo, which is symbolic of the rapture. The freedom of God's faithful being freed from this world and the Antichrist. So, and 33 is also symbolism for Jesus, who was resurrected at the age of 33. And again, the time in which the owl was free is the word for resurrection. Jesus at the age of 33. Hence these 33 connections to the rapture from the owl. Okay, and it all comes back to Paul Simon, because Paul Simon's prophetic concert was in Central Park, and he has an owl on the cover of his new prophetic album, 7 Psalms, which if you watched part 1, which you need to, I explained how God, through a dream, told him to make this album and told him the name of the album, 7 Psalms, which is about the end of life, one of the themes of the album. You need to watch part 1. Like I said, you should have turned the video off if you didn't and go to watch part 1 before watching this video. So this is so amazing. I mean, yeah. The release of 7 Psalms was exactly 500 months after 500,000 people attended Simon and Garfunkel's famous reunion, as in the reunification of man with God and the rapture, concert in Central Park. Paul Simon also in Hebrew Gematria equals 500. Okay, I mentioned that earlier. God uses records for his signs. Another reason for the 74,000 customers power outage sign on February 22nd and Swift's approximate $74,000 outfit is that the largest volcano eruption in history occurred 74,000 years ago. The supervolcano eruption occurred in Indonesia, where the 44th president grew up for 4 years. The predicted eruption of Yellowstone in the 44th state supervolcano will be in the 44th state. Okay? And I haven't had the time to really confirm it, but I suspect that the eruption of the Yellowstone will be on the day of the rapture, May 26th, 2024. Okay. Paul Simon's first hit, by the way, the rapture again will be 9 times 9 days after the death of Paul Simon, the predicted death of Paul Simon, who released the album 7 Psalms at the age of 81, 9 times 9. Paul Simon's first, okay, now here is where, this is just, make sure you're seated, holding on to your hats, as they say, okay? Paul Simon's first hit was Sound of Silence. Simon is predicted to die on March 6th, 2024, which will be exactly 9 years and 11 months, which is also 119 months, which hints at the warning of judgment on 9/11 in 2001. After the death of Mickey Rooney on April 6th, 2014. Mickey Rooney's career was launched at the age of 7 with his role in the very popular Mickey Maguire short film series. The series was one of 2 very popular series to successfully transition to talkies. Okay? The other being Our Gang. Everyone probably knows Our Gang. From what I read, though, Mickey Maguire was just as well known. It just didn't survive into the reruns into the decades afterwards, unlike Our Gang. Okay, but they were competitors of each other, these 2 short film, silent movie series, okay? And they were the only 2 successful ones, popular series, to successfully transition from silent to talkies. Okay? Mickey Rooney, was among the last surviving stars of the silent film era. I don't know why Wikipedia says among the last. I'm sure he was the last. So let's just rephrase that. Rooney was the last surviving star of the silent film era. Maybe I'm wrong, But anyway, what do I know? Rooney is symbolic of silent films. That's the point. Rooney is symbolic of silent films. And this is why his death, connects to the predicted death of the composer of Sound of Silence, the first song of Simon's career, the first popular song. The 7 trumpets that are described beginning in Revelation chapter 8, are preceded by a short period of silence in heaven. Mickey Maguire short silent films. It's in brackets. It's hinting at this. As is The Sound of Silence by Paul Simon. Okay, this sound of silence, this period of silence that precedes the 7 trumpets of judgments, is after the Lamb opened the 7th seal in Revelation 8:1. Simon's 7 Psalms album was released when Simon was 81 years old. Simon's death will precede by a short period the judgments and destruction that is coming. This is the point. All right. Now, again, 9 years and 11 months connects the 2 deaths. That's 9/11 judgment warning symbolism. At the end of this 9 years and 11 months that connects the composer of The Sound of Silence and the last star from the silent film era, on March 6th, will precede by a brief period, a symbolic period of silence that is described in the book of Revelation in chapter 8:1, that precedes the 7 judgments, the 7 trumpet judgments. And that's why Paul Simon released the 7 Psalms album at the age of 81, an album that God told him to make. I think a period of silence is in order here. There are no words, so I don't know. Should I just play a minute of silence? In God's signs, the number 13 is associated with Paul Simon. Paul Simon is predicted to die on March 6th, 13 days after the Simon-related sign on February 22nd, the solar flare. March 6th will be also 13 days before March 19th. And Kamala Harris's predicted death in a plane crash and the predicted 2 dirty bomb explosions in New York City, where Simon is from, and where Simon has had prophetic concerts, including the reunion concert with Art Garfunkel, and where the owl is, or died. March 19th is 13 days before the predicted explosion on the surface of the sun. Okay? So from Simon's death, well, as I explained earlier, from the solar flare, it is 13 plus 13 plus 13 days to the solar flare. But Simon's death will be 13 days after the solar flare, which is 13 days, and Simon's death will be 13 days before Harris's plane crash and the explosions in New York, which in turn will be 13 days before the explosion on the sun. The predicted explosion on the sun and America's power grid going down is hinted at with the Bridge Over Troubled Water song and US 93, which hints at 93 million miles away, which is the sun, that goes over the Hoover Dam, which produces electricity. And this highway connects the 48th state to Sin City, Las Vegas, in the 36th state, and again 36 into 666, the number of the Antichrist. Bridge Over Troubled Water won Song of the Year and Album of the Year at the 13th Grammys. The big question is why Paul Simon is associated with the number 13 in God's signs. The answer is Simon's song, America. The number 13 is symbolic of America. America began with 13 colonies. However, the question is, why did God design it that America began with 13 colonies? The answer is that through the number 13, God communicated that America is an Israel. America is symbolically God's Israel. America is God's chosen nation. Symbolically, America is the 13th tribe of Israel. The tribe of Joseph was replaced with two tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. Although Manasseh was the younger sibling, the Lord blessed Manasseh with the inheritance. There is a case to be made that Ephraim symbolizes Great Britain, along with the descendant countries Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, and that Manasseh symbolizes America, the younger sibling with the inheritance, and the 13th tribe, hence the 13 colonies, which are in fact, in a sense, tribes. More on this, because that's how ancient Israel was divided as well. When the tribes of Israel arrived into the Promised Land, the territory was divided for the tribes, just like the founding 13 colonies divided the territory. That is, in a sense, 13 tribes. More on the subject is in this interview with Stephen Speicherman. Okay, if you want to look up him, he can talk to you a lot more about how it is that America is the 13th tribe. The composer and singer of the song America is predicted to die 13 days before Harris's crash and the dirty bombs, which will be 13 days before America's power grid goes down, which will be 13 days before it is predicted that Barack Obama will be appointed the 51st vice president on April 14th, 2024. The date, April 14th, for Obama's appointment as the 51st vice president was not originally discovered through adding 13 days from April 1st. April 14th was first considered because it is the 14th of the month, and therefore possibly connected to the date Obama was in the 51st state, Puerto Rico, on the 14th of June in 2011. Then it was realized that the S&P first reached the 5100 level for the first time on February 23rd, 51 days before April 14th. After this, it was recalled that February 13th, which since that's 223 and the 48th prime number president, 48th president, was the day of the Central Park Owl sign, which connects to the Rice Owl's quadruple doink. And Paul Simon, who famously sang in Central Park and recently released his new album with a cover that depicts an owl. So in other words, February 23rd was also a Paul Simon sign, a date. The owl died on February 23rd, 2 times 2 times 3 days, which also hints at 223, before it is predicted that Paul Simon will die. The famous Central Park owl's name is Flaco, which is 222 in English gematria, and this was the day after the Simon sign on February 22nd. It could also be that the owl died on February 22nd at night. Flaco, the owl, died 15 days after Joe Flacco, player number 15, was awarded the NFL's Comeback Player of the Year honor in Las Vegas, Sin City, in Nevada, the 36th state, 666. This comeback award for Flacco hints at the comeback of the night owl president. 13 plus 13 plus 13 days after Simon, who has an album with the owl on the cover, who also hints at Flacco, the owl, is predicted to die. In fact, Flacco famously played for the ravens, a type of bird with similar symbolism as owls. The big story of Joe Flacco's remarkable comeback season is his age of 39, which hints at the 39 days in between Simon's death and Obama's comeback. The Lord has been using these comeback signs, including football signs. The comeback of Tom Brady, the two comeback games at the end of the 2022 season. And anyway, it's amazing here. We're talking about the comeback of the year player at the age of 39, okay? And that's why it hints at the 39 days, 13 plus 13 plus 13 days in between the death of Simon and the comeback of Barack Obama. And as I have been saying since the beginning, the death of Simon will in fact be a step in the trail that's leading to Barack Obama, the 51st vice president. Now I'm in the process of explaining why that is. So far we have these connections. Again, 51 days from the S&P reaching the 5100 level for the first time on the day of the Central Park owl sign, right? And okay, so let's move on. Flacco won the Super Bowl MVP of the Blackout Bowl, the Blackout Bowl Super Bowl in 2013. That's a typo. Okay, and I should emphasize 2013. When the power went out in New Orleans in the stadium, which is ultimately a hint at the flood of Katrina in the stadium. I mean, the stadium, the Superdome, was the epicenter of the flooding news story when all of the refugees took shelter in the football stadium, if you recall. Well, anyway, okay. So the Blackout Bowl was the game in which Flacco, many years ago, won the MVP. Since that time, his career declined, and he wasn't even a starting quarterback this year, but then he made a comeback in the middle of the season. The starting quarterback got injured, and he took over and led the team to the playoffs. Anyway, that's why it was the comeback of the year. All right. Okay, so the Blackout Bowl was the first Super Bowl in New Orleans after the walls of security collapsed and New Orleans was flooded. Flacco threw 3 touchdowns for 21 points, 7 plus 7 plus 7 points, which hints at the 3 sets of 7 that the Israelites enacted before the walls of security of Jericho collapsed in God's judgment in the book of Joshua. And he did this before halftime. Okay, Flacco threw for 3 touchdowns, which are 7 points each, which makes it a 7-7-7 sign before halftime when the power went out. Okay, the power went out in the first play of the second half, which was in itself prophetic, that play. But I don't want to get too much into the details of the Blackout Bowl prophetic sign. The comeback of the 39-year-old and MVP of the Blackout Bowl hints at the 39 days in between the Simon Owl Flacco sign on February 22nd and the power grid going down on April 1st. In the 39-year-old's comeback season with Cleveland, with the team from Cleveland, Flacco replaced Deshaun Watson in the middle of the season. Watson's prophetic story, he's another prophetic sign. This man, God has used in other prophetic signs. Watson's prophetic story is about his trade from Houston, which is Harris County, as in Kamala Harris, where Category 4 Hurricane Harvey dumped 4 feet of water over 4 days on the 4th biggest city. Okay? So he was traded from Houston to Cleveland. Cleveland is symbolized by the number 23 because President Grover Cleveland was the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, just like Barack Obama in his comeback will serve non-consecutive terms. And the term that he skipped was the 23rd presidency. And in God's signs, God pairs 23 and 44 to confirm the signs and connections. And Houston is the 4th biggest city, but it is also known for Hurricane Harvey, Category 4, and 4 feet of water over 4 days, okay? It's a pairing of 23 and 44, in other words. Obama's comeback will be the result of Harris's plane crash, hence Harris County, and like President Cleveland, who skipped the 23rd presidency, the president who wore jersey number 23 in basketball high school will serve non-consecutive terms after being away from the White House, which is what Flacco's hiatus from being a starting quarterback and his comeback hints at. The connection between Flacco, the New Orleans Blackout Bowl, and Deshaun Watson from Houston is also hinted at with the evacuation of New Orleans residents during Katrina, mostly to Houston. Also, Flacco won the Comeback of the Year honor in Las Vegas just before the Super Bowl in Las Vegas, in which Taylor Swift, who is obsessed with the number 13, attended her 13th Chiefs game in Super Bowl 58, which hints at 5 plus 8 equals 13, and this gives us a 13 plus 13 plus 13 sign in the Super Bowl, which equals 39, which is Flacco's age in his comeback. And he won the award just before the Super Bowl because he's 39 years old. That's one of the reasons for why it's a comeback. Super Bowl 58, involving the San Francisco 49ers, pointed to Pope Francis as the Antichrist in Revelation chapter 13. And Flacco beat the San Francisco 49ers in the Blackout Bowl, which, by the way, was the Super Bowl in which Colin Kaepernick played. And he is a sign in God's signs, and his kneeling, he began the kneeling movement, which is symbolic of kneeling to Satan. He hints at the Nicolaitan doctrine, which is the doctrine that the vast majority of evangelicals have today, which Jesus said he hates in Revelation chapter 2 and is coming to make war on those who teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine with the sword of his mouth. Okay, and that doctrine that God is overwhelmingly communicated through his signs, and the prediction being made in this video will prove this, is sovereign grace and free grace, which come in the packages of dispensationalism and Calvinism, which both lead to once saved, always saved, the myth of imputed righteousness as evangelicals understand it. Our righteousness is as filthy rags, one verse that Luther took out of context and twisted to support his entire heretical Gnostic theology. He got his theology from Augustine, as did Calvin, and Augustine was a Gnostic auditor for 9 years before joining the Catholic Church, and then later in his writings corrupted the Western Church with his Gnosticism. And anyway, it's also once saved, always saved. I mentioned that already. All Christians will be raptured. And this idea that you can't earn your salvation, that's the line they throw out to counter anyone, any opposition to their doctrine, which they believe one needs to hold in order to be saved. In other words, the vast majority of Protestants and evangelicals believe that intellectually agreeing with the proper doctrine is how one is saved. And that's why they are so squirmish when confronted with the texts that contradict their doctrine, which is basically on every other page in the Bible. Because for their doctrine to work, they isolate certain passages and ignore the rest, including the teachings of Jesus. And furthermore, they interpret the teachings of Jesus through the writings of Paul instead of the other way around. But even the writings of Paul clearly contradict their doctrine. In other words, there really is no excuse for this doctrine. The reason for the doctrine of cheap grace and free grace and one doesn't need to do anything, or rather, I should say, actualize their faith, just like how James said Abraham's faith was justified when he followed through with the command to sacrifice Isaac, just like Rahab's faith was justified when she did her act of faith, when she helped the Israelites in Jericho. And in other words, one needs to actualize their faith. There's two parts to salvation. One is deemed righteous for believing, but that faith involves a trust and therefore, by necessity, involves a doing. And this doing often involves risk and sacrifice. It isn't just any old regular doing. In other words, for example, willingness to lose their job in order to not take the mark of the Antichrist, which is the thing, or willingness to not be able to travel and go on vacations. You get the idea. That is the purpose of the mark of the Antichrist. And dispensationalism is heresy, and those that believe that the thing couldn't be possibly the mark of the Antichrist because the rapture hasn't occurred yet, believe me, the reason why most Christians have, quote-unquote Christians, have taken the mark of the Antichrist already is that it is judgment for this doctrine, which is the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day. The idea that the things described to the seven churches and in the book of Revelation doesn't apply to them because they're in the supposed age of grace and they don't need to do anything and then they're already past tense saved is heresy. And it's judgment for it. And the prediction being made in this video will prove what I am saying. This is the purpose of this prediction. Make no mistake, this prediction that is from God is to prove what I have just said. The reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove this, and I know far better than you why and the purpose of this prediction. Anyway, if you are a Christian, the most important video on this channel is the 23 church signs video. Make sure you watch it. It'll explain more regarding doctrine, which is very important. And one of the problems in evangelicalism is anti-intellectualism, which says that one's ignorance is equal to another person's knowledge. But in fact, a person's love for love, and they'll say, oh, I just love Jesus. But in fact, love for God and love for Jesus is deepened with increased knowledge. All right, so back to what I was saying. I had to go off on the tangent because, this is ultimately the point of all of this information in the first place, is to warn people, including quote-unquote Christians. The vast majority of people listening to this video, including those that call themselves watchers. Okay, the reason why people will be raptured is because they have already actualized their faith. They've already died. They've died, as Jesus said. They've become like a dead kernel of wheat and gone into the ground in order to produce fruit. Jesus said to bear one's cross. He said that one needs to hate their life in this world in order to have life in the next. And so most quote-unquote Christians have not died the self. They are living barely indistinguishable lives from other non-believers. I'm not going to judge, what is good and what is not, but a lot of Christians don't do enough. They have a phobia when it comes to work because of their doctrine, work and sacrifice, and they have kind of a phobia into doing anything because if they think, well, if I think too much about I need to do this for God, then I'm going to lose my salvation because my salvation is based on my intellectual belief. But in fact, James says the exact opposite. He said, you do well if you believe, but even the demons believe. Read James chapter 2 and don't listen to the work around creative solutions that the Gnostic heretics of the evangelical culture offer to counter these clear passages that contradict their doctrine. They have these workaround solutions that are nonsense. All right? All right. So be that a warning. If you are watching too many YouTube videos, it's time to stop. My opinion is the best thing you can do right now is to hand out the flyer that I hand out. And now is not the time to hand out traditional evangelical tracts, which are largely heresy anyway and improper. Preaching the love of God is not the thing to do at any time, let alone right now. The love of God is rarely mentioned in the Bible, and it is always in context of the redeemed, including John 3:16 if read properly, in context, which means reading the passage that comes before it. You know? So anyway, I got off track. Hopefully, if you are not a Christian, you bared with me there as I had a little diatribe. So let's continue. I was talking about Joe Flacco and the connection with the owl named Flacco. And I was talking about Joe Flacco being the MVP of the Blackout Bowl and his play against Colin Kaepernick, which is how I got off track because he's one of the men named Nick that God has used to point to the Nicolaitan doctrine and the kneeling to Satan and all of that. Okay? All right. The number of the Antichrist in Revelation 13, chapter 13, is 666. And Flacco won comeback of the year in the 6 times 6th state, 66 days before Obama's predicted comeback as the 51st vice president. Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel's historic reunion concert in Central Park was in Central Park. An owl is on the cover of Simon's new album. The famous Central Park owl is named Flacco. Simon's new album is named Seven Psalms. The book of Psalms is in the Hebrew Bible. Flacco in Hebrew gematria is equal to 80, which is 40 plus 40, which is at 44 and the 44th president. A theme in the Seven Psalms album is about death. Paul Simon and Art. Okay, so this is actually a typo. I got the year wrong, so ignore what I just said. But their reunion concert was exactly 9 months and 11 days after John Lennon died, next to Central Park. And John Lennon, right before he died, had reunioned. I don't know the word for that. It's not a word, but he reunioned with Paul McCartney. Paul Simon reunioned with Art Garfunkel 9 months and 11 days after John Lennon reunioned with Paul McCartney and died next to Central Park, and Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel reunified, that would be the word, in Central Park. Okay? That is amazing. And again, Paul Simon is predicted to die 9 years and 11 months after Mickey Rooney. That's another 9/11 connection. And 9/11 occurred in New York, which is where Central Park is. Okay. So, John Lennon died from being shot. Shots are symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist. The bullets that come out of guns and go into people are symbolic of the thing that comes out of things and goes into people, which is the mark of the Antichrist, and isn't supposed a precursor to the mark of the Antichrist. Okay? And it doesn't need an additional something to go with it, such as an additional technology or a form of false religious worship or a supposed new age of dispensation after, quote unquote, all Christians will be raptured. And the prediction being made in this video will prove this. That is the purpose of this prediction. All right? And nowhere in the Bible does it say that one cannot repent after taking the mark of the Antichrist. Even so, most Christians have already taken it, but like I'm saying, there's nowhere in the Bible that says you can't repent. And also, the commonly held objections that people have based on their understanding of Bible prophecy are answered at the end of the must-watch snake bite video on this channel. All right. And again, believe me, I know why the purpose of this prediction from God. It is to prove what I have just said about it being the mark of the Antichrist in its current form. Okay? Shots are symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist, from which God's faithful will be rescued and raptured. Lenin, in English gematria, is 444, which is the 44th president Antichrist. And Lenin is also 74, which hints at America, the date 74, in simple English gematria. John Lennon in English gematria is 726, and 726 in the Greek concordance is the word for rapture. The death of John Lennon connects to the death of Paul Simon. Paul Simon in Hebrew gematria is 500. G500 in the concordance is the word for Antichrist, and 50 symbolizes the church. And Paul Simon symbolizes the rapture because of his song, Bridge Over Troubled Water, and which was the fifth and last album that won 5 awards at the 13th Grammys. Simon was 81, 9 times 9, when 7 Psalms was released. 9 times 13 equals 117, which is symbolic of separation and the rapture of God's people from the world. Simon, which is hinting at which 13 symbolizes because of all of the 13 association with Simon, as we've been explaining, including the 13th Grammys, will die at age of 81, 9 times 9 days, and 81 is 9 times 9 before the rapture. Simon will die at the age of 82. The 82nd word in the Hebrew concordance is the word to fly, which is the rapture, because in the rapture, the Lord's faithful will fly. And G82 is the word for the Greek word is unseen graves. And that's the rapture, because those that will be raptured will not die, and they will have no graves. Their graves will be unseen. The first use of G82 is in Luke 11:44. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye are as graves which appear not, and the men that walk over them are not aware of them. Flacco, Joe Flacco, the quarterback, received the Comeback of the Year award in Sin City in the 36th state, which is at 666, 36 plus 36 plus 36 days before the rapture from the Antichrist and the mark 666. And that is amazing. But you could also say too, because Flacco connects to the owl Flacco, which is about flight. Okay? So, okay. I think you got that. That's quite a bit of connections there, but Paul Simon is predicted to die on March 6, 2024. The big question is, why did the Lord point to March 6, 2024 with 51st state and 51st vice president symbolism, signs, and connections? So I'm writing to those who know what I'm talking about. But as I think I mentioned earlier in the video, I made a video that is over an hour talking about the connections from the 51st state and the 51st vice president symbolism for the date March 6th, which is why it was originally believed that Barack Obama would become the 51st vice president on March 6th. When it was learned that he wouldn't be, it was quite confusing. And it was confusing also to think about how Paul Simon is related to all of this. But upon further thought and research, it has become very clear, and it is amazing. Paul Simon's death is in fact a sign that is pointing to Barack Obama becoming the 51st vice president. The date of his death, March 6th, is in fact a step in the trail of signs that is leading to the predicted death of Paul Simon. Leading to the day on which Barack Obama will become the 51st vice president, March 14th, 13 plus 13 plus 13 days later after Simon's death. And that is why the connections involving the 51st state connect to March 6th. All right, Let me explain. Simon's only number one hit as a solo artist was 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. Barack Obama will be appointed the 51st vice president by his wife, the predicted 50th vice president. And this is the reason for Paul Simon's Mrs. Robinson song, a very famous song, because Michelle Obama's maiden name is Robinson. This isn't the only Robinson sign that God has used for this purpose. However, this isn't the full explanation for why God pointed to March 6th and the death of Paul Simon in regards to Obama becoming the 51st vice president. The question is, does Paul Simon have a connection to Puerto Rico, the 51st state? Yes, he certainly does. In 1997, he released an album named The Cape Man, in which one of the main songs is Born in Puerto Rico. The album was for his Broadway musical of the same name about a convicted murderer from Puerto Rico. Thus, the Cape Man album and musical is Antichrist symbolism. Obama, the future 51st vice president, is a murderer. He had his gay lover at the church in Chicago murdered, for example, and he murdered his chef at his mansion. Speaking of Paul Simon and mansion, this isn't even in the email thread. I haven't even written about this yet. But the Paul Simon mansion fire sign, which is described in part 1 of this video, and the sale of Paul Simon's mansion in New Canaan and his relocation to San Antonio are also a parallel with Obama's mansion, where he murdered the former chef, in July of this year. Okay, so Obama, the future 51st vice president, is a murderer, and he was the first sitting president to visit Puerto Rico, the 51st state, in literally 50 years. And that's a prophetic sign in itself because, again, as explained in part 1, 50 years connections are prophetic in God's signs from Leviticus chapter 25. But also, he visited for the first time since John F. Kennedy visited Puerto Rico 50 years earlier as a sitting president. And, well, anyway, let's just move on. Okay, so God uses records for his signs. The Cape Man Broadway musical was the biggest flop in Broadway history. So Paul Simon's big, Cape Man Broadway musical production that he had been working on for, I guess, years, ended up being a flop. The biggest flop in Broadway history, in fact. Okay? It ran for 68 shows. 68 hints at 6 times 8 equals 48, the 48th president. It lost $11 million. And Simon's The Cape Man album for the musical was his 9th studio album. This hints at the events of 9/11 in Manhattan, and Broadway is in Manhattan. Right? That's amazing. The Broadway musical lost 11, and his album for the musical was his 9th. That's a clear 9/11 sign, which immediately makes this a prophetic sign. The New York Public Theater presented a concert production of the musical in the summer of 2010 at the Delacorte Theater in Central Park. Central Park is where Simon and Garfunkel reunited for their prophetic concert. Central Park, or the Central Park Owl, died on February 23rd, which is the 48th president because of 223 and the 48th prime number. 2 times 2 times 3 days, which also hits at 223. before it is predicted that Paul Simon will die. Okay, so the Cape Man is about a murderer who's from Puerto Rico. Paul Simon has a song, Born in Puerto Rico, on the album. We're going somewhere with this, okay, as we can tell. And Puerto Rico is the 51st state, and God has been using these 51st state signs to hint at the 51st vice president, which is why, for example, Barack Obama was the first sitting president in literally 50 years to visit the 51st state. All right, in 2008, Simon and the Spanish Harlem Orchestra performed the Cape Man at the Brooklyn Academy of Music with some of the original cast and other well-known artists. The deeper reason for these connections between Paul Simon, Puerto Rico, and Latin American themes is Simon's very famous Latin music song, Late in the Evening. The song was released in July of 1980. In the month before Simon and Garfunkel's prophetic reunion concert in Central Park in September of 1980. Late in the Evening was released in July of 1980. Simon performed the song with Garfunkel at the historic and prophetic concert, which went late into the evening, for that matter. And it's known for that, because you can see as they're performing, the sun is setting, and then it's late and it's dark. Late in the evening is symbolic of time running out. With Simon's death on March 6th, God will be communicating that time is late for America, which is a song that Simon sung, by the way. For America to repent and turn back to God. Late in the evening hints at the very near destruction of America, which will be soon after Paul Simon's death and the period of symbolic silence. The sound of silence. Late in the evening. And this, by the way, is how Paul Simon connects to the 51st vice president. Through the 51st state, which is why all of the connections from the 51st state to the date it is predicted Paul Simon will die, and Paul Simon's Latin American music song, Late in the Evening, which is hinted at through the Cape Man and the song Born in Puerto Rico, is the symbolism. Late in the evening is the symbolism God is communicating for America, that time is running out. It is late in the evening for America. This is so amazing. This is the end for America. And Paul Simon's death will be the symbolic beginning of this. That's how huge this is. And the Antichrist is about to come to power. And through Simon's death, he is even also pointing to that, the 51st vice president. The reason for the various signs on February 24th that involved the number 8 and why the S&P 500 closed at 5,088.80 on February 23rd, the day of the Central Park owl sign, is that it hints at the 7th seal, followed by the 7 trumpet judgments in Revelation chapter 8. Chapter 8 begins with the sound of silence, as in Paul Simon, in heaven for about a half an hour, as it says in the text. The death of the composer of 7 psalms with an owl on its cover will signal a brief period before the beginning of the trumpet judgments in Revelation chapter 8. Okay, now, again, the owl died on the day the S&P closed at 5,088.80. The name Jesus in Greek gematria, in the Greek Jesus, is 888. But as explained in the February 24th emails, there were a number of signs involving the number 8. And the reason why the owl died on that day, which is associated with Paul Simon, is because Paul Simon, the death of Paul Simon, is pointing to Revelation chapter 8. Revelation chapter 8:1 is the verse in which the silence is in heaven before the 7 trumpet judgments. And that's why 7 Psalms was released with the owl on its cover when Simon was 81 years old. It hints at Revelation 8:1. But I explained that earlier, but what I'm adding to all of that is how there were these signs of these 8s on the 24th of the month in the year 24, and 24 is 8 plus 8 plus 8 furthermore, but it was on the day of the owl, and the owl is connected to Paul Simon, like we've been talking about. All right. Also, the song Late in the Evening is known for its trumpets, which is why Simon's death will precede a brief period before the 7 trumpets in Revelation chapter 8 will begin. Also, Jesus coined the phrase the 11th hour, which referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness. In English, the 11th hour is an idiom that means last chance, time is running out, which is what the song Late in the Evening hints at, which is why Flight 11 was the first plane on 9/11 to strike its target, the Twin Towers, that looked like a giant 11, in the 11th state. Late in the Evening is hinted at with Simon's The Cape Man album and Broadway musical, which lost $11 million. And again, the musical was in Manhattan, where the Twin Towers were. The Cape Man concert was held in Central Park. Flacco, again, this was the concert that was done years later in 2010. Flacco, the owl, died in Central Park 15 days after player number 15, Joe Flacco, won his award right before the Super Bowl 58, which is at 5 plus 8 equals 13, which was 11 years after he won the Super Bowl MVP award for the Ravens in 2013. The Ravens beat San Francisco, which since that Pope Francis, the Antichrist described in Revelation 13, and the Ravens play in Maryland, which is symbolic of Catholicism. Not only is it Mary, but also the history of Maryland is connected to Catholicism. Revelation chapter 18 describes the dirty birds, as in ravens playing in Maryland and Flacco the owl in Mystery Babylon, which is the cardinals in Rome. This is what I'm speaking about, is how this is a prophecy in the Bible, one of many, that clearly point to the Pope and Rome as being the Antichrist and Mystery Babylon. The dirty birds, the cardinals. There's lots of bird symbolism in Catholicism furthermore. And that would be it for this email thread and this video. Yeah, a lot of profound, very, very profound information was covered in this video. Make sure that you share this video and don't ever stop sharing it. In fact, as Jesus warned in Matthew 25, right after the 10 bridesmaids, which is an allegory for the rapture, comes right after that. And he's speaking to believers. He's talking about the believers using their bags of gold and one of them not using it, who was banished to hell, which of course clearly contradicts the mainstream evangelical doctrine. But anyway, this would be a bag of gold. There is nothing comparable in terms of a tool for evangelism than predicting something in advance. This is like prophecy in the Bible in a way. And so this prediction will prove the Bible, right? And it'll prove so much more, especially when the person sees all of the information in the video and learns that it wasn't an accident, that Simon's death was predicted in advance. So make sure you share the video. Don't ever stop sharing it everywhere you go in social media. And also, if you'd like the file for the flyer I hand out, please contact me. I'll leave the email in a second here. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Please leave a like and upvote the video. And once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more. Don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, TrumpPrediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the BitChute.com or the Odyssey.com channel. And do it now in case you aren't able to later.